And that was in 1850, Thomas who built it, and in 1869, he deeded it to Sarah Jane Dorsey. That cabin still stands. The other cabin was directly across from across from Bushy Park Cemetery. And in 1973, 50 years ago, I lived in that log cabin. I lived there my whole entire life. I'm from this area. I grew up on Cemetery Lane. I am also the great-granddaughter on both sides. On the Dorsey side, my great-grandfather was a slave. He was a freeman. And on my grandmother's mother's side, she was a toddler, and she was on a plantation. They call them big farms though up here. She was on one of the biggest farms in Howard County down in Marriottsville. It was so big, Isaac Anderson called it Little Africa. And so I have that history. What I do is I am a historian and I do genealogy research. I specialize in African American history mainly because we were not allowed to write and put anything on paper. It has been handed down generation to generations. But you know what happens when the oldest one dies? That is lost. So I always suggest talk to the oldest family member, put something down. Because when you're young, it may not seem interesting, like they were talking that old stuff. But now, I'm digging in cemeteries and in books and on census. But let me tell you about the census. The census is a great tool, but it isn't. Because the people who did the census could barely read and write themselves. But we were not allowed to write our history. So they put our names any way it sounded. If your name was Sarah, you might be Sophie. If your last name was Smith, they might add an E to it. However they deemed. And that's the way they went into the history. I have seen Dorsey as Dorsee. I have seen my birth name Costely as Costely. I have seen it everywhere. But the one thing that, to give you a backdrop, in the 1600s, when people were bought from other countries, here, they took everything. They took your families and sold it, or put them in bondage.
That's right.
And trust me, it wasn't only us. There was the Italians, there were the Jewish that came over to Ellis Island, there was the Irish who were indentured servants, there was the Japanese Americans who were put into internment camps, there were the Native Americans, all of those, the Trail of Tears, 6,000 people died on that trail. So don't ever think that it's only happened to us. Everybody here today, you have an ancestor that it's probably happened to. But since this is Community Day, I wanted to pull the churches that I am aware of right in this area. And as it goes, Mount Gregory is the oldest one. And they were established in 1867. Then the next one was West Liberty. And that was in 1873. Now, Mount Gregory Church, the mother of the church is alive and well, and she's still over in Cooksville, and she is 101 years old. Miss Genevieve Anderson Cook, and her ancestors are here. After Daisy, we have West Liberty, and they were in 1873. Daisy was 1906. The fourth one was Hopkins United Methodist Church, 1882. And there are descendants of those people here. And the baby of the churches was Full Gospel. It was established in 1946. We have been standing for 77 years. And the mother of our church, Miss Dorothy Powell Howard, turned 104 yesterday. Yeah, her birthday was August the 18th. So this community has withstood some stuff. Brown's Chapel Church, when they closed the doors, they were there 125 years. Don't think it can't happen to our churches. It can. So I suggest you know your history and look into it. Now here's the biggest myth. Let's see it on a little trivia. So let's see. How many believe that slaves do not own property? How many believe that slaves were not allowed property? Wrong. They were allowed to own property. Many of them owned their own children so they could manumit them at certain times. If they freed them all at once, they could be captured. But if they freed them one at a time, if their property was taken, that is the only right that a slave had, was to go and get his property. So that's why some of our slave grandfathers owned their own children. And they did for protecting. Another way they protected them was the males. Women were sold and they got married. The males were William, David, John, with different middle names so that they would be easily traced.
Your Bible's the right verse.
So that is part of the history. And if you are interested in seeing if your family was on the 1860 free rolls in Howard County, I have a copy on your table in different areas. They're broken up by areas. You can look and see if your last name is on that roll.